Michael Tran joins me here today, and you could learn what his team is up to by going to parks.com. That's going to be a clickable link in the show notes. We are going to be talking about flex industrial today and what that means. Thanks for your time here today, Michael.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So let's dive in because I haven't had a ton of people on talking about this niche. Could you define flex industrial for the audience?
Yeah. So flex industrial is a combination of office and warehouse. Usually it entails more warehouse than it does office here in Texas, where we're based out of. And a lot of these are smaller tenants, 1,800 to 2,200 square feet in a 6,000 to 8,000, 10,000 square foot building, multi-tenant, just kind of like a business park. You could imagine metal buildings that have, a bunch of businesses there. And, they've got businesses such as auto repair, pool companies, concrete guy, landscaping company, plumber. And so they all kind of work synergistically within the park together as well. But that's typically what we would define as a, flex business park.
Sure. So it's more of like tradespeople, and they are typically going to be very stable type businesses.
Yeah. A lot of these guys, their credit is that this is their livelihood. And so a lot of these guys just make it work. A lot of these parks are also, with so much growth here in Texas, these parks are just so popular because they're always in up and coming neighborhoods or where the population growth is just, jumping every year. And so if you find a really good located park, you can kind of fill it up with these types of tenants pretty easily.
So does your group acquire existing parks, or are you building fresh?
So our group right now, we have acquired one park as a team. And then also now we're helping investors getting into the space, look for new sites to develop, which we have small ownership in another park down in South Texas, but we're helping advise on the build, the design, tenant sizes that we're looking for, and amenities to make sure that at least as quickly your tenant retention is high and that there's always good growth on your rental rates and the future of the park in general.
So I mentioned that when we go to your website, there's a lot of information there. So it sounds like your team is rather large and can handle quite a different aspects of this.
This asset class is very localized and specialized. And so Texas is big enough for us to handle. Will we dabble in Oklahoma a little bit too? I think you had a guest on here previously, Stoic, and they're also just focusing in one area, right? They're southeast, and Texas just kind of encompasses that same size. And so we're covering, yeah, from South Texas all the way to Oklahoma. There's five of us on the team: me, Cody, Austin. We've got Zoe and then Nick on our leasing team. So there's five of us that cover Texas and Oklahoma.
So what is your primary focus as a team then? Are you trying to acquire more properties yourself?
So we're a little bit of both right now, just because we're kind of at the forefront of this product type. And so, but our main day to day is helping investors and developers find good sites to develop new parks because honestly, for us, we get a lot of calls for people looking to buy this product. And so that's our day to day, just getting new developers in, getting those parks stabilized, and then selling them off to, a large real estate fund or large, private family office who's looking to invest in the stuff.
Well, can you talk a little bit about what's behind the data there then? What are you using to decide what's the best locations? You have already mentioned kind of those suburbs or those growth areas, but is there anything else?
You know, there's 10 things we really follow closely. And so we looked at one of the better parks out here that sold at a really high price per square foot. And that price per square foot was in the 165 range. So what we took was the demos of household income. A lot of it out there was 200 plus a year. And then we took average year built. So anything built after 2000 typically is what we're looking at. Another demographic we're looking at is population growth as well. And then we also look at per capita spending. And then this one's a really key one because this product looks very close to self storage, but they operate very differently. Whereas, self storage looks for a very high renter ratio in the area. Well, we're looking for a really high homeowner ratio compared to renter. So anytime it's over 75, 85%, that's where we really like it in that range. And that's one we follow really close just because these guys who are leasing these spaces, it's where a lot of their business comes from is homeowners who really care about curb appeal and making sure that their home's kept up really well versus a renter who wouldn't spend anything on their space.
You mentioned a mechanic, but so is that the situation there? There's kind of a working bay and then kind of a front office where to greet.
Yeah. So it typically is 10% of their leasable space. So they'll just have a 10 by 12 office and a restroom. And that's just where they conduct their paperwork, their business, take payment. So a lot of these guys will just use that small office for any paperwork they need to get done. And then the majority of their business is done out in the warehouse space.
Sure. So can you talk a little bit about the leasing associated with this? Is it multi-year leases and how that might be positioned?
Yeah. So the leasing aspect of it is very unique in a sense where it's a lot like multifamily. A lot of these leases are 1 to 2 year leases. I haven't seen many go over three in a lot of new parks just because a lot of these tenants, they like to operate kind of on that month to month. And I've seen owners who have purchased these parks. A lot of these leases go 3 to 5 years sometimes in parks that were built a few years back because they just thought longevity. But with the industrial space in the last, 5, 10 years, the rental rates have just kept climbing and climbing and climbing where that 3% increase in their lease is below market at this point, where, a park that is, $12 a foot triple net is now, leasing out for 15, $16 a square foot triple net. And so with a lot of these investors coming in, you see a lot of these multifamily guys see it where they're like, okay, I can lease this space to a tenant, 2 year lease. I don't pay a ton of commissions or pay commissions at all to any agents just because a lot of these guys just call you off the sign anyway. So you're typically leasing as you develop, as you build the buildings. A lot of these trades will just be driving because they work the market. They need that space to lay down however much pipe they need for the plumbing company, or this concrete guy's working on this whole development next door. The leasing is probably the largest tenant pool that you're going to run into just because the spaces are so diverse. If you take a higher ceiling park that has like 18 to 22 clear, ceiling height, you have now opened up your space to what we've seen a lot of basketball training facilities, baseball, batting cages. We've even recently sold a park to an investor out of California who really liked a pickleball tenant that has come into the space, and they pay really good rent and they're busy all the time. And it works for their park because it's kind of off peak hours when a lot of these players come to the facility. So you can still operate with your regular trades during the day. Parking is sometimes something you got to watch out for, but we're offsetting the hours for a lot of these tenants. And, you can't forget you've got CrossFit gyms leasing these spaces as well. And also, your regular martial arts spaces. So lots of tenants in for a very simple product that works for many tenants.
So, do you take on it sounds like with all of these different uses, there might be different things that need to happen, whether you have to retrofit that space for that purpose. Is that on you as the owner then, or is that something that the resident or tenant picks up?
So just like any other asset class, an investor or owner is only going to spend typically what they budget for TI in a lot of these spaces. So if you look at it from the perspective of those unique tenants I told you about, a lot of those guys are the batting cage tenants, the basketball guys. they're having to put in that their own stuff just because it's outside the typical scope of work for the owner to put in. And that's another reason why a lot of people really like this asset class is just because, you know, a lot of these guys that are your regular, I would say tenants, like your blue collar trade, those guys don't really need any PIs. They just need their warehouse, sweep it up. If they ever left, you just sweep it up again and then replace them with another similar trade.
Okay. So, outside of the actual space, then, is there any other amenities that is typically provided by the owner?
So what we're seeing as this asset class evolve, you need to make it more amenity friendly and heavy just because, you know, we've seen guys put a shared concrete dock where 18 wheelers can now deliver to, and they'll just bring a pallet jack, lift it off the truck, roll it down, bring it into their space because a lot of these are grade level. We don't see many parks that have dock height here. And so that's one really popular amenity. Another one we really like is side yard. It's just a small laydown space, but we've seen them used for so many different things. One specifically, transport company was, shuttling a lot of kids to school during the peak hours of summer and during the year as well. What they'll do is they'll just bring it out, have all the cars go, do their route, and then it's a secured fenced in space that's still attached to their warehouse. And, they can just do maintenance or whatever on each car, but also just park it outside in that side yard space that they had. We've seen guys who have a lot of plumbing equipment that doesn't need to be HVAC'd or even covered. So they'll store that stuff outside. We see a lot of trailer parking sometimes as well. That's another really popular use for the side yard. And then another one that we also really like is showroom glass is a really good amenity because you can sometimes attract a retail user that doesn't really need retail, but still wants a retail looking front. That's another big one for us too.
I would imagine like yard too for landscapers and the like.
Oh yeah, for sure. The crazy thing about side yards is we have done 3 case studies on them and your tenant retention, your rental rate, and your overall leasability goes up 10 times because we've seen markets where on the same exact street, I sold a park on the, it was an 8 building park and none of them had side yards. The going rate there was $9 a square foot gross average across the board at that park. It was about 48,000 feet. There is another park with side yards on the same street. Every tenant in there had been in there for over 5 years, only 1 year leases, and the owner had increased rent every year on every renewal, and every tenant had stayed there, and their rate was $14 triple net. It's a huge, huge advantage to have these, even though you're losing a little bit of rentable square footage. You actually differentiate yourself from the competition as you add amenities just like that one.
Hmm. Well, yeah, amenities is could be that's a really different type of an amenity in this situation. And I suppose, unless people are working with a group like yours, they might not be aware that that is something that is even needed or maybe even required.
Yeah, so every developer we're talking to now, this is one of the highest amenities that we really push for just because it just helps so much. It's almost, I feel it should be required at every park now because the ones that are so basic are the easiest ones to put down and get onto the market. But those are also the easily replicated ones. And you don't want to be, in a sea of the same park competing against one guy who's got, 100,000 square feet and you're just building your first park and you've only got, 20, 30,000 square feet. And you want to be the different one who stays full. And I've seen that time and time again.
Just to remind everybody, head over to flexbusinessparks.com. That's flexbusinessparks.com to learn a little bit more about what we're talking about here. And if you found some value in what we're talking about, do us a quick favor, share this with one of your investor friends. And if you're watching on YouTube, give us a quick like and subscribe. So, has there been anything that has surprised you in this asset class so far, Michael?
This asset class 20 years ago, we could not give it away at 9.5, 10.5 cap rate. And after COVID and during COVID, it just became really popular. We just started seeing investor demand go up for this stuff. And it really pushed our cap rates down on a lot of these assets, even though I don't really like to talk cap rate on these specifically, just because price per square foot is typically how a lot of investors look at these. And the crazy thing is we're starting to see these get to where it's almost, 160 a square foot sales price average. We've even done some up to 200 per square foot, whereas before, these were selling for $20, $30 a square foot 20 years ago. And so that's been a really big shock to me on this asset class.
It just broke up there for a second, but you were just saying that you're seeing after COVID, you saw a pretty significant change regarding.
Yeah, yeah, it's just been it's been a really good inflation fighter. And so we're seeing a lot of cross asset buyers coming into this. So it's been making it a lot more competitive to get this stuff. But that's been the biggest shock to me is just how this asset has turned around in the last 20 years.
Sure. You know, would it be fair to say compared to a lot of other commercial properties, it's a little quicker and easier to set up, the building of this? I mean, you compared it to storage units, but it seems to be kind of in between a storage unit and a traditional commercial property.
I don't think anything in life is easy, but if we're looking at building anything at this point, I will say a lot of these parks we work on, they're outside the county, very little restriction. And so as long as you keep it under that fire code to save yourself from having to sprinkler the building, you we've seen developers put these up in about 18 months and fully stabilize them probably about 6 to 12 months after that. So I would say this is something that a first time developer could look at and probably still do a good job because like one of our best clients, he built a park and he saw the mistakes he did here and there, maybe not this color metal, this metal fades, or how to be a little bit more efficient with your build. And now he's able to build these in anywhere from 12 to 16 months and kind of turn it around after that. So I would say it is easier than most since you don't have to go hunt for that tenant in hand because a lot of the tenants will just come naturally on their own if you're in the right area.
You mentioned there was some significant change after COVID regarding this asset class. We saw some significant changes, at least in my market, for just commercial properties in general. Are there any current product that might be sitting dormant that could be converted to this type of thing?
We've spoke with a few groups that are looking to do this on infill location. Um, Definitely getting a zoning change is a little bit difficult for an asset like this because if you're inside the city, they'll definitely require you to build it a little bit nicer where your price per square foot may start to climb there. They may make you do all brick instead, but if your rental rates out in that market are good, I think there is opportunity to do this. I don't think there's a lot of people doing it yet in the city, but to answer your question, I definitely think there are properties that can be converted in every area that's based off of demand. And that's kind of one thing this asset class can kind of learn from self storage is figuring out where's the demand, where's the supply, is there a gap that needs to be filled? And we're very close to figuring that out with our research team to see where the hot spots could be for the product like this.
Yeah, it just comes to mind, like, in my market, we have some strip malls that are sitting empty right now. After COVID, they just haven't been able to come back, and it just seems like if somebody could come up with a way to make use of that space, there would be an opportunity there.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've only seen one park converted here, but in DFW, it's been a very hot market here. So there's not a lot of deals anymore, but definitely in other markets there are. And if anybody ever feels like, is this a good site for this? Feel free to send it over. We're happy to give you our take on it.
Can you give us, you kind of alluded to one customer of yours that is building something now and is kind of fine tuning his development process. Can you share any other stories regarding somebody who's successfully have accomplished this?
I have a client right now in Bernie, Texas, which is a very nice suburb just on the northwest side of San Antonio. They built this park. They started building 2 years ago. Recently just finished it late last year. And as of today, it's fully stabilized. And they're getting some of the highest rates we've seen for this stuff. They're in the 16 to $18 a square foot range. You know, the the easy or not easy, but one of the things about this product is you can build it where you have a septic system. And a lot of people get intimidated by that because you're like, okay, how do I do this? How do I maintain it? But the main maintenance beyond that is a 1 year thing annually. You can build the rest because these guys aren't heavily using these spaces like that. So you don't always have to be tapped into city utilities to have a successful park just because a lot of these are ahead of the curve when you are building a lot of flex parks.
That's interesting point, especially if you're building on a growth area.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation and very interesting.
The only thing I would say about flex industrial, I hinted at it a little bit earlier, but definitely really hone in on amenities and also make sure you build to the area. And so kind of what I mean by that is, hey, if this area is only commanding $12 triple net rate, you might not want to build the Taj Mahal of the flex park. You want to make sure you keep it a little bit more basic, save on your costs, make sure you can get your returns on that one. But if the area is super nice, higher end, definitely add in all those amenities because then you can really push your rates that way. One thing our team actually covers a lot for a lot of people, we'll look at an area, what kind of rates they can demand out there so they can really build for the area. And a lot of the evaluations we're doing on these land sites are free. If you think you have a good 2 to 10, 20 acre site for flex, feel free to send it over because we do a lot of these evaluations throughout the nation right now. I know our team's based here in Texas, but we're working on stuff on the East Coast, Washington State, Florida, almost everywhere right now. We love this stuff. Happy to share our insights on it as well.
Oh, that's great to hear. So being essentially nationwide on that piece of it is probably going to be really beneficial.
I think it will be for us for sure. It just, there's not anybody like really in this space, right? There's a few players, but what we've really honed in on is just trying to figure out, that site, how to build that, and then, where these are. And that's kind of how we just started sharing a lot of our info on where to build them at with a lot of investors who have just done a site to look at.
Sure. Well, if you're ready, Michael, we'll jump into the rapid fire questions and close out this episode.
Yeah, for sure.
What lie do real estate investors sometimes tell themselves?
Man, so many. But one that I do see is a lot of them get hung up on a cap rate. Cap rate is just a way to compare different asset classes. And so one thing we've seen in this asset is a lot of people have said, hey, I can sell my park at a 6.5 cap. And turns out that 6.5 cap was, you know, $80 a square foot. Whereas we haven't sold anything in the last, 5, 6 years under $100 a square foot. So don't get too hung up on the cap rate. Try to look for price per square foot versus cap rate.
Okay. If you could go back in time and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would it be?
There's a lot of those there, but for my real estate career, when I first started, I was a generalist. I was working three different asset classes, all the major ones, retail, office, industrial. Once I honed in on just one, I was a lot less stressed and I became a lot better at what I was doing. And I definitely enjoy the real estate industry so much more now that I'm just honed in on one thing.
Do you have a book recommendation?
I have two for you. One is Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I think that's really helped just improve my self awareness, management, and kind of social awareness, and also ways to just really maintain better relationships with my clients. And then another one, it's not one I'm reading, but it's one I wrote that I wanted to share. So our team here, since this is the act that we work in, and there's a lot of new investors getting into the space, our team wrote Domination. So Cody Payne, Austin Edelman, and myself, we wrote this easy read. It's on Amazon now. So feel free to check it out if you are interested in Flex.
I'll make sure to have a link to that in the show notes as well. And then finally, what single strategy, process, or tool have you implemented that has had the biggest time saving impact to you or your business?
For our team, every year we sit down and we try to see what process or processes that float us down. And so it's almost an ongoing thing every year, but a lot of it is data driven. And so as a data guy myself, we've really just cut out a lot of things where we as agents should not be doing. And so we've started to offset some of our tasks to our admin. We've done a lot better at working through a CRM with the cleanest data that our team really honed in on as well. And then lastly, also getting all of the tasks done and a way where we can communicate to each other without having to go get up and talk to each other. So we're always plugged in on everything we're doing just through our CRM, and that we can just tag each other. Hey, I'm working on this. Hey, I'm working on that. And then kind of converge all the info at once where it's on a board. And then we kind of go through that together every week.
Sure. Well, I really appreciate your time here, Michael. One last time, head over to flexbusinessparks.com. That's flexbusinessparks.com. You could learn a little bit more about what Michael's team is doing there. But this was great. I really appreciate everything you've brought to the show today.
Thanks for having me.